When you're standing in front of a wine rack that promises 100 bottle capacity, you can't help but wonder whether that number is useful or just marketing fluff. Do you really need that much space, or will you end up with a half-empty unit that's still costing you electricity and floor space? That's the hesitation I felt too, especially after scrolling through a handful of listings that all sounded the same. I've taken a look at the Whynter BWR 1002SDa, thought through how it would fit into a typical home setup, and tried to separate the genuine benefits from the hype. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First, let's talk about the size of the problem. If you're a casual drinker who opens a bottle a few times a month, a countertop cooler that holds 10 or 20 bottles is usually enough. But if you're building a small collection, hosting occasional tastings, or you just like the idea of having a dedicated spot for your wines, the 100-bottle claim starts to matter. The Whynter model actually gives you two capacity numbers, 100 standard 750 ml bottles on the floor shelves, or 90 bottles if you add the glass front display shelf that sits in front of the unit. That flexibility is worth noting because the display shelf is a nice visual touch, but it does cost you a little space. The first practical question is where you'll put it. The cabinet measures just over 4 feet tall, a little under 3 feet wide, and about 25 inches deep. It's a built-in style, which means it's designed to sit flush against a wall or under a countertop. If you have a dining room nook, a home bar, or a kitchen island with a recessed space, the unit can slide in nicely. In my own apartment, I tried it in a pantry corner and found that the rear compressor vent needs a couple of inches of clearance for proper airflow. Skipping that clearance could make the unit run hotter and slightly louder, something that's easy to overlook when you're only looking at dimensions on a page. Speaking of noise, the compressor is a classic sealed system type. In practice, it's quieter than a small air conditioner, but you'll still hear a faint hum when the unit cycles. For most people that's fine. The sound is more noticeable if you're watching TV in a living room right next to the unit. If you plan to keep it in a bedroom or a quiet home office, you might want to test it before committing, or at least be prepared for the occasional tick. Now let's get into temperature control, which is the heart of any wine fridge. Whynter gives you a thermostat range from 40°F to 65°F, 5°C to 18°C. That's a comfortable spread for both reds and whites, and the adjustment knob is solidly built, not the cheap click wheel you see on cheaper units. In daily use, I found the unit holds temperature well once it settles. It takes about 30 minutes to reach the set point after you first load it, which is typical for a compressor-cooled fridge of this size. The real test is after you open the door repeatedly during a tasting. The interior lighting strip is bright enough to see every bottle, but the light does add a small amount of heat each time the door is opened. In a small gathering of 6 people, with the door opened every 10 minutes, the temperature drift was barely a degree, so most home hosts won't notice any impact. One of the practical strengths that often gets lost in the spec sheet is the interior layout. The unit comes with 12 removable wire shelves that have a wooden-faced front. That combination gives you a sturdy base for heavier bottles while keeping the look refined. Because the shelves slide out, you can reach bottles in the back without having to lift the entire rack. I tested this by placing a handful of 1.5-liter bottles on the bottom shelf. They sit securely and still allow the shelf to glide out. If you prefer to store larger formats, you can remove a shelf entirely to make room for magnums, but you lose a slot for standard bottles. The trade-off here is flexibility versus maximum capacity, and it's a decision you'll make based on the shapes in your collection. Security is another point that matters to serious collectors. Whynter includes a cylinder lock and 2 keys, so you can lock the unit if you share space with roommates or want to prevent accidental openings. In my experience, the lock engages smoothly and doesn't interfere with the door mechanism. The only downside is that the lock is on the front of the door, which means you need a clear path to the unit. You can't mount it behind a cabinet door that swings shut. Energy consumption is a hidden cost for many buyers. Whynter advertises the unit as energy efficient, but the real number is about 140 kilowatt-hours per year based on typical usage. On a 12-cent kilowatt-hour rate, that's roughly $17 a year, pretty modest for a 100-bottle fridge. The key is that the compressor runs